There's a pretty big problem in the London taxi trade right now. We have a shortage of taxis. Hello everyone, my name is Tom the Taxi Driver and welcome back to my channel. If you enjoy what I do here, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Obviously because of the pandemic, it's been a really tough couple of years out in the cab. I've had the days where I've been driving around for 3 hours without anybody getting in the cab, to now where we've got the opposite problem where there is just too many people wanting cabs. But how did it get this way? What has happened? So I'm going to share the 3 things that have really turned the tides that have made taxis busier than ever. Number 1 is the restrictions to diesel vehicles. Now all London taxis are exempt from the ultra low emission zone and the congestion charging zone. However, diesel restrictions mean that some of the older cabs are slowly being phased out. The way it's generally always worked in London is that your cab is not allowed to be more than 15 years old from when it's first licensed in London, irregardless of the condition. It doesn't matter whether you've only driven it 1 year and you've left it in a garage for 14 years. Once it passes its 15th birthday, as we call it, it's no longer allowed in London. It's usually sold to somewhere else in the country. What the Mayor of London has done is actually take 3 years off of that 15-year age limit, down to 12 years. And as a result, that's kind of timed out now. Just last month has been the first month this age limit, this phase has come in. Every year, of course, there is a set amount of vehicles that do come off the road, naturally, because they get to this 15-year age limit, but that's now been exacerbated. Diesels are being phased out much quicker than what they previously were. Added to the fact that I'm sure a lot of garages would have decommissioned their taxis during the pandemic. A lot of drivers, of course, with there not being no work on the streets, what was the point of them holding onto this cab if they couldn't go out and earn the money? So they handed all these vehicles back to the garages, and of course all the garages have got all these taxis come back out of nowhere. The Mayor of London did have a de-licensing scheme, which was kind of like a bonus payment if you hand back your diesel cab, if you take it off the road and say it's never going to be licensed in London again, and then you get a grant for that. So I'm sure many fleet owners done this to kind of free up this surplus stock. So that's point number 1, the fact that there are less diesel taxis in London. Problem number 2 is that some level of work has returned. So more and more drivers who handed in their taxis, maybe they went back on the tools, maybe they went back to other jobs that they might have held beforehand, all of a sudden want to come back into renting a taxi. Taxi fleet owners have less diesel taxis than ever. It's also pointless for them to invest in diesel taxis for rentals because the writing's pretty much on the wall. The mayor has said, look, I want to phase out all these diesel taxis. So the only way for these fleet owners to go is to invest in hybrid taxis like the LEVC TXE. You might think, well, what's the problem there? They just surely go out and go buy some taxis. Because we're still not quite out of the woods with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of financiers and private lending companies don't want to offer the finance to these fleets. It's still seen as a bit risky in case we have another lockdown, and how will these fleets pay for these taxis they take out finance on? Fleets really want to expand. They want these taxis. They've got queues and queues of drivers who are eager to return to the trade. People with taxi badges who want to come back and work, but they can't because there's not enough taxis for them to get. LCDC recently covered this. They went to Colts Cabs, one of the largest firms for renting taxis in London, and they just have to constantly turn away drivers. Drivers turning up with their families saying, look, I need to go out and earn money. I just need a taxi, anything. Can you get me any form of taxi? But as we've learned, no diesel taxis as they're being phased out, and the electric taxis are very expensive to buy. But the finance companies aren't lending to these garages. So there's nowhere to go. There's no vehicles that we can get to fill up this demand in London. And the third part of this perfect storm is the fact that Uber's prices have been getting higher and higher and higher. I demonstrated this in a previous video where Uber's surge prices are generally more expensive than the metered taxi fare. There's a couple of reasons for this, but generally there's less Uber drivers on the platform, meaning that they surge more often because they are in higher demand more often, pushing the prices up. And recently this month, Uber have actually announced that for the first time since 2017, they have actually had to put prices up on the platform. So with Uber going up in price, more and more people getting into taxis, having much more of a demand on the service, it's no wonder why there is always queues at stations at very busy times in the day. I've had it, some days where I go out and there's people fighting over my cab, where people will be hailing you down on the street and you'll have someone try and walk in front of that hail because they want the cab first, especially in really busy areas like, say, Piccadilly. And I've had it where I'll let one person in and then someone else will come up to my window and go, well, I hailed you down first. And I'm sorry, I can only take one of you, but I just saw that hand first. It's a really hard situation. And you might be watching this video and thinking, Tom, what the hell are you complaining about? You're pretty much telling us that it's really busy out there in a taxi. Yes, it is busy. Yes, it's very good for me. However, if you're in the queue at Paddington Station and you're waiting and waiting and waiting, or any station for that matter, there's only going to be so long that you can wait for a taxi. And if you just want to get home, I'm sure many people would pay above the odds, maybe use a competitor. And long term, that is not the strategy for us taxis. If there's not enough taxis at a station, if there's not enough taxis on the street for people to hail, we're not a reliable service. And if we're not a reliable service, then people won't use us. What's even more annoying is that we've got the taxi drivers. In the news earlier this year, we had the issue of being able to get petrol. Not because there was a petrol shortage, but because there was a shortage of drivers driving the tankers. So unlike the HGV crisis, where there is physically not enough people with a HGV license, in London, there are plenty of taxi drivers with badges. There's I think it's about 18,000, 19,000 people who have a taxi driver's badge, but there's only about 13,000 vehicles. I mean, you could do the math there. There's obviously not enough vehicles for the amount of drivers. And it's so annoying because it's exacerbated by the Mayor of London and some of the schemes he's brought in. So with the HGV drivers, there's emergency measures brought in by the government to allow European drivers to come over and drive HGVs here in the UK. But, you would think that the Mayor of London would say, you know what, let's just allow diesels for the remainder of the year, next couple of years, until the fleets can get their stock sorted, until the financiers are letting them borrow money to invest in these super awesome new vehicles. So the only way for some Londoners to get home, if there's a shortage of taxis and private hire drivers, is to walk, in the middle of the night bus, and that's it. There's no night tube. So these are all quite sort of vulnerable situations. If you're walking home at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, let's say you work in a bar, you want the security of a taxi or a private hire vehicle, and everything is failing on that level. So what is the ultimate solution to this? Maybe we should extend the diesel allowance for a bit more, or have greater options on converting older diesel vehicles. What's the point in a vehicle that's only 12 years old, just because it's got a diesel engine on it, why we're banishing it to never be licensed in London again? There should be incentives to be able to convert this into electric, so you still keep that iconic taxi shape, but it gives drivers more options. You might just say, Tom, well, for these drivers who are going to the garages and renting taxis, why don't they just do what I've done and just buy a taxi or get it on a PCP deal? The only problem with this is that PCP or buying a taxi is only really suitable if you're going to be in the trade for about 5 years or so. Renting's quite a flexible option. Every driver's circumstances are different. I'm much younger, I can pay off a taxi, I've got quite a few more years in my career ahead of me. But if you're an older driver approaching retirement, you're not necessarily going to go down to the LEVC dealership on Brewery Road in Islington and sign yourself up to a 5-year deal, a 5-year hire purchase or PCP plan. That just seems absurd. Why would you want to lumber yourself with that when you should be winding down your career? So you've got these older drivers that might have had another 3 more years in their taxi, their diesel TX4, who have gone to the end of their career and gone, you know what, I'm just going to sell this cab elsewhere, get out of London and just retire early. It's not an ideal circumstance because drivers want to get back to work and help out this crisis in London. I'm working as hard as I can and just trying to get as many people in the taxi and get people moving across London. But long term, it's not a good situation. We need to have a more reliable taxi service because there's only so long, especially in the winter, late at night, that people are going to be waiting for a taxi before they seek other alternative ways of getting home. I'd be interested to know your opinions on this. Should TfL bring back the night tube so more people have more options of getting home late at night? Should they give more incentive or some financial support to the garages who desperately need these new and updated vehicles? Or perhaps there's another way of solving this issue. Thank you once again for watching. Take care, and I shall see you all again soon. Bye bye.